Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another one of our most frequently asked questions, and the question last week was: how long does it take to wake up after being ventilated? You can check out the answer to that question if you're clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is: my auntie is failing over and over again to be weaned off the ventilator, and she has a tracheostomy. She's also on kidney dialysis. What should we do? John writes in: Hi Patrick, my aunt is on a ventilator. She was on the tracheostomy collar for 5 days, doing well, and she said hi to us and she recognized us, and the next day she was confused, but she was also getting dialysis 3 days a week, and all of this with no rest. On the 5th day she got respiratory acidosis and she got put back on a ventilator. She was put back on the tracheostomy collar, and again in about 3 days they started her on a 24-hour weaning regime again. This time they didn't start her on the 12-hour tracheostomy collar and 12 hours on the ventilator like they did for several days to build her up to 24 hours on weaning, and after 3 days she got respiratory acidosis again. Both times this happened the night before she was doing fine. I noticed that they don't respond to the alarms when she coughs, and it has an effect on her breathing. I think that happened several times over the course of the night, which may have contributed to the acidosis, and she also had dialysis both days before the acidosis happened. Her heart rate is more erratic now, going from 94 to 115 beats per minute. Before it was more regular, more between 70 to 85 beats per minute. Now they don't want to try and wean her off the ventilator again. How can I make the intensive care team wean my auntie again? She has been on the ventilator for about 6 days now. Also, her blood count was low, about 7.4, which I believe affects the weaning. One of the respiratory therapists verified that it does affect the weaning. The last dialysis they gave her a transfusion of 2 units of blood, and she is more alert now. Please send me all the reports you mentioned in the 2 videos I have seen on YouTube. Also, please send the information you think may be helpful and why the heart rate changed. Please send it as soon as possible. Thank you for helping my Aunt Caroline and me and her brother in this situation. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you, John. Hi John, thank you for your question. I'm very sorry to hear what your auntie is going through in intensive care. I'm also sorry to hear what you and your family are going through during this stressful time in your life. From what you describe, there are a number of issues that I can see, and it would also be helpful for me to know how long your auntie has been in intensive care in total since her admission, and how long your auntie has had the tracheostomy for. It would also be good to know how long your auntie had been in intensive care before she had the tracheostomy. If you could clarify those time frames, it would help me to give you the right type of advice. In the meantime, I can advise you on the following, given the information you provided. Number 1. There is no reason, from what I can see, why the intensive care team can't wean your auntie off the ventilator and off the tracheostomy, unless there are any other reasons that you haven't mentioned or that the intensive care team hasn't mentioned to you. There is no reason why the intensive care team can't start the weaning process all over again. What you and your brother need to keep in mind though at all times are things like the intensive care team's agenda. For example, does a prolonged stay in intensive care suit the intensive care team? For example, if the intensive care unit currently experiences a low occupancy rate, would a prolonged stay of your auntie in intensive care contribute to their bottom line? Number 2. A low blood count of 7.4. I would think that you are referring to your auntie's hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the marker in the blood for the red blood cells, and the lower the number of red blood cells in the blood, it diminishes the ability for oxygen to be bound to the red blood cells and therefore carries around the oxygen in the blood. Some literature suggests that with a hemoglobin level above 8, the odds for success when weaning off the ventilator remains significantly higher. Therefore, giving your auntie some more blood transfusions would most likely help her situation. Number 3. Your auntie's ongoing hemodialysis. You are describing your auntie's dependency for ongoing dialysis therapy. I would think that your auntie is in acute or chronic renal or kidney failure. There are a number of issues that come with acute or chronic renal or kidney failure in intensive care, especially when it relates to weaning off the ventilator. If your auntie is in renal or kidney failure, and if she doesn't get regular hemodialysis, fluids will build up in the lungs that can make weaning off the ventilator more difficult. Therefore, regular hemodialysis is most likely essential for your auntie to be successfully weaned off the ventilator. Having said that, with ongoing hemodialysis, your auntie will most likely also experience a drop in hemoglobin, which are the red blood cells, which in turn is requiring regular blood transfusions to keep her hemoglobin levels up. Number 4. Your auntie's increased and erratic heart rate. It's rather normal to have an increased and even erratic heart rate when being ventilated and in intensive care. Imagine the stress your auntie is going through mentally and physically whilst being in intensive care, as well as the stress her body is going through whilst undergoing the therapy in a stressful, busy, noisy and sterile environment that is intensive care. The best way to treat your auntie's increased heart rate is to wean her off the ventilator and get her out of intensive care as soon as possible. Also, make sure that she isn't in pain or discomfort, because if she is, it would increase her heart rate as well. Also, here are some links to articles as they relate to ventilation and weaning and dialysis in intensive care. The first article you can click on and read is Tracheostomy and Weaning of the Ventilator in Intensive Care, How Long Can It Take? The second article is Why Does My Loved One Need a Tracheostomy in Intensive Care? The third one is Why Your Critically Ill Loved One Might Need Dialysis or Hemofiltration for Kidney Failure and is having a dialysis machine attached to them. And last but not least, the next article is the 5 things you need to know if your loved one is confused, agitated and non-cooperative in intensive care after coming out of an induced coma. And in regards to your question about that the intensive care staff don't respond to the alarms, there is another article where I put a link to, and it's Why Are the Intensive Care Team So Relaxed When the Alarms Go Off? There's an explanation there for you. Also, check out intensivecareathome.com.au if your auntie gets to stay in intensive care for longer than expected, even if she stays on the ventilator. Intensive Care at Home is a home care service and a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care for long-term ventilated patients with tracheostomy. Check it out at intensivecareathome.com.au. I hope that helps, John, and please send me another email with more questions if you have any. How can you have peace of mind, control, power and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free reports, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. Also, how you can eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will also get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. And it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section where we answer your questions, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again in another update next week.